Good morning, everyone. This is Calvin with Family Caregiver Alliance. Thank you for joining us for caregiver support and the power of community. I'm Calvin with Family Caregiver Alliance and your host for today. Over the past 4 decades, FCA has been working across the Bay Area and the nation to improve the well-being of family caregivers. We offer support through consultations, classes, workshops, publications, retreats, research, and advocacy. So if you'd like to learn more about us or access our online resource center, Family Caregiver Alliance CareNav, please visit us at caregiver.org. Now, during the webinar, your phones or mics are going to be muted. So if you have any questions, you can ask them by using the Zoom Q&A box, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. So now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our two presenters, Patricia Gill and Dr. Jim Wilson.
Oh, thank you so much, Calvin. Can you hear me okay? Great. Oh, I'm assuming you can. It is our pleasure to be here with you today. Wish we were in person. I would love to see all of your faces and to have that connection, but so grateful that we can be here on this Zoom platform together. And what we're going to talk about today, first, I just want to thank the Family Caregiver Alliance for inviting us to be here, and also for all that you do. As somebody who's been a caregiver and works in this field, what the Alliance does is tremendous and incredibly helpful for not only caregivers, but professionals in the community at large. So I want to extend a big thank you for what you're doing as well. And today we're going to talk about Schurig Center for Brain Injury Recovery, the organization, what we do, how we do it. We're also going to talk about what we've learned from caregivers about the challenges they face, what they need, how to be support, but then also the power of community coming together and what that does for people. It's underrated. When you work in the field, you see the power of community in helping people in all challenges and areas of life that we face. So we're going to have a discussion about that. We're looking forward to time for your questions at the end. And what I'd like to do now is just introduce us a little bit so you know who's talking to you today. So we'll go to the next slide. And Dr. Wilson, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Patricia. And it is a pleasure to be here today and to provide some insight into caregiving and understand the difficulties that people face. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been in practice in California for about 35 years. I have worked in many different settings, including institutional settings, hospitals, and other locations where my background in brain injury rehabilitation is needed. And I continue to consult with the Schurig Center, and I'm very honored to be able to be here today and meet everybody.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to work with you, Dr. Wilson. And well, my name is Patricia Gill. I have a master's in clinical psychology. I have a background teaching at universities. I've worked at universities doing research studies. I managed a home for people with dementia. I've been here at Schurig Center for, I can't believe it, but it's been 16 years. Which I can't believe that I'm that old that I could be here 16 years. So it's an amazing place to work. And so I have a background in clinical and education and research. I've also been a caregiver. And interestingly, as the executive director here, working with a team to design our services and our programs, I also was a caregiver for my grandmother who passed away about 6 months ago. And she was having repeated falls and traumatic brain injury. So I was working in the field and also able to care for my grandmother. So I have a sense of what some caregivers do feel. So we'll dive in now to Dr. Wilson. Can you tell us a little bit about this amazing brain that we have
Yes.
in these heads of ours?
So, as a neuropsychologist, I've been given the opportunity to really understand the most amazing part of our body, the human brain, and how complex it is and how vulnerable it is to injury. the brain has approximately 100 billion neurons, and that's a number that is almost too large for us to comprehend. And it also has 20 billion axons. Axons are the connections that link parts of the brain together, sometimes in bundles, and often referred to as white matter. These are the links within the brain. And also, each neuron has 7,000 connections with other neurons. So if you multiply the connections that each neuron has times 100 billion, you end up with total connections of 7 times 10 to the 14th, which is an incredible number. It's equal to or greater than the number of stars in our galaxy. It's a huge, very, very complex number that gives us a sense of the immensity of the brain in terms of its abilities. So let's talk a little bit about acquired brain injury, because that's brought many of you here today in terms of your caring for people who have acquired brain injury. And just to let you know that there are many types of acquired brain injury, and that at the top of this list, you'll see traumatic brain injury, TBI, and concussion listed, but that's only one of the many forms of acquired brain injury. For example, hypoxic or anoxic brain injury, ischemic brain injury, which is stroke, infectious brain injury, and neuroplastic brain injury, tumors. So all these forms of brain injury can result in conditions of cognitive impairment and affect psychological and behavioral functioning. And all of these are acquired in the sense that they occur after birth. So we will want to.
Is that what did you want the next slide?
Thank you.
Or did you want this one?
The next slide.
Okay, there you go.
So just to point out a few things here in terms of brain injury, diffuse axonal injury, which is shown on an MRI scan to the left, depicts white matter injury. White matter, again, are the axons, the very thin, delicate fibers that connect the areas of the brain together, connect the gray matter to various locations in the brain. And you'll see here injury, which is showing up as the white spots. Those are white matter tract injuries, and caused by usually by an acceleration deceleration force. In other words, the brain is moving rapidly, and consequently, because of differences in various degrees of density, these injuries occur in certain locations near the white matter gray matter junction in the brain. You'll have those kinds of injuries, and they're significant because they interrupt communication that takes place within the brain and slow the whole process of thinking down to some degree. So it's important to know that this type of injury can be very hidden, and we'll talk more about that later in terms of its implications. The other form of injury, of course, is a coup contra coup injury, which involves, again, movement of the brain and injury to opposite sides of the brain from the same force. So the force affects the brain, causes it to move and ricochet off the inner skull and move back. And so you have injury in more than one location, usually two locations. Traumatic brain injury can be thought of in terms of its causation as well. And you'll notice that we have several causes for traumatic brain injuries, TBI. You'll notice that we have falls as the single largest cause of traumatic brain injury. And this is extremely important because falls occur at various frequencies in different groups, and including children and seniors. Falls are considered one of the main causes of TBI, and the data supports that. So we'll be talking more about falls later because they are one of the more significant things that caregivers get involved in terms of prevention, and also in terms of making sure that when a fall does occur, the proper remediation, elimination of the particular cause of that fall is addressed. So we'll talk more about that.
Dr. Wilson, did you want to just say a little bit about concussion?
Okay, so concussion is a form of mild traumatic brain injury. And I'll be showing you some information on mild traumatic brain injury. Okay, can you go back one? Okay.
Yes, I can. Do you want this here? There you go.
So the technical medical term for concussion is mild traumatic brain injury. And this is abbreviated small m, TBI. Mild traumatic brain injury or concussion is the mildest form on a spectrum of mild, moderate, and severe. So usually people think of moderate and severe brain injury as being catastrophic, which it often is. Mild traumatic brain injury isn't as severe, but yet it can have life-changing implications as well. And what this slide shows us is that mild traumatic brain injury in different levels. For example, the last two columns you see in the slide, mild traumatic brain injury with alteration of consciousness. Alteration of consciousness, AOC, means that the person is having some change, perhaps confusion, disorientation due to the concussion. And then in the last column, you'll see loss of consciousness, LOC. And you'll notice that with each of these levels, there are different percentages of PTSD. So when you have a more severe concussion with loss of consciousness, you'll notice that the odds, the percentages of people having PTSD are much higher. And this also is true with depression. So when we're caring for people who've had concussion, we have to pay attention to coexisting conditions, including post-traumatic stress disorder and depression.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. So what I want to do is just also share a little bit about Schurig Center for Brain Injury Recovery. One thing that we know about brain injuries is that they do not discriminate, and they can happen to anybody at any time. I wanted to share just a few stats about the frequency of injury. Probably all of us know somebody who's had some form of acquired brain injury. So for traumatic brain injury, or TBI, it's often considered a silent epidemic because often people who have a traumatic brain injury seem fine. So they are referring to themselves as the walking wounded. And people have expectations that they can do a lot more than they are capable of doing. And it can cause a lot of stress and challenges in their life with those expectations. And also for the caregiver who's caring for somebody with TBI. Every 15 seconds, there's a traumatic brain injury happening in our country. And it's the leading cause of death for people under the age of 45. But what's particularly striking about it, I think, is that there are more cases of TBI every year than breast cancer, AIDS, multiple sclerosis, and spinal cord injury combined. So it's a very frequent injury, yet there's not as many resources as are needed to help treat. Oh, the slides are too small. I'm just looking at the chat. Too small. Okay, maybe Calvin can help with that if he's watching the chat. And then also for veterans, veterans obviously have a high number of mild traumatic brain injuries from the recent blast wars there. Okay, on my screen. Okay, sorry, I'm looking at the chat and I want to make sure everybody can see what they need. And so then I'll jump to stroke. There's a stroke occurring every 40 seconds in our country. It's the leading cause of long-term disability. So having post-acute continued rehabilitation and support for acquired brain injury is very important. And Mary Ellen and Jeff are people who benefited from our organization and said that they had really never thought about brain injury until it affected their lives, which is often the case. So leading into Schurig Center and how we started 37 years ago. I love this picture because, he's on the bicycle, he's missing his front wheel, had to find a solution, found a grocery cart. Probably is going to have to pay for that cart, but he's figured out a solution. And that's what happened for Karen Schurig, who is the founder of Schurig Center for Brain Injury Recovery. She started the organization when her daughter was in a car accident at the age of 14. And they found that after her daughter received the medical rehabilitation and was sent home from the hospital setting, that they became isolated. She had to quit working to caregive for her daughter, and they lost a community that they had prior to the injury. So she started pulling together a few other families and survivors to create a very small grassroots organization that served a handful of people, and today has grown into serving several thousand people each year. And so Karen, I actually heard her say this quote. She hired me as the program director at the organization. We help people accept that their life has changed and to rethink their dreams. Karen Schurig passed away in 2009. And we continue to think about her and remember her legacy that she has left us all. This is an image of our beautiful center. We're located in Larkspur, but as many things have changed from the pandemic, we had to go remote very quickly within a few days' notice as everybody's life changed in March of 2020. We had no access to our server. We had nothing remote. Everything was on site, bustling center. Well, now we're hybrid. So we have on-site services, and we will always continue with remote services as well. So I'm in this center talking to you today. We've been changing lives for 37 years, and our mission is to help improve the quality of life for survivors and caregivers, but also to raise awareness about the causes and the effects of acquired brain injury. And we had a survivor say to us that brain injury is like a pause button, and Schurig Center helps survivors hit play again. So I was struck by that quote. So I wanted to share that. And the people that we help at Schurig Center, they're us. I mean, it's the community. We're helping our family members, friends, colleagues, our neighbors. We all know somebody whose life has been touched in some way. And I just thought it would be nice to share with you a few examples of the array of people that have found support and benefit from the center. So Bill, a veteran who lives with side effects of traumatic brain injury, and also Barbara, whose daughter suffered a brain injury in her 30s from a virus, which is not as common for people to come to the center from viral infection, but it does happen. Also, Nancy, who is a mom who needs help remembering how to write and receive emails after she had a stroke. And then we also have Joe, who was rehabilitating to go back to work after he had a concussion from a bicycle accident. So it really is quite an array of people who benefit and come to our center. So how Schurig Center helps the community and supports people who have had injury. There's a lot of information on the slide, but basically to summarize for you, we tailor our services to try to meet the needs of the clients who are coming to us, who are seeking us out, and to meet them where they are. And we try to serve people with the array of acquired brain injury. We design programs to help the whole person, so psychological, physical, emotional, cognitive, social, and communication. We really try to help all those different areas in the array of services that we have. And the goal of the organization from 1985, when Karen Schurig started it, is to fill gaps in care. So if we can refer to another organization for a service, we don't feel the need to add that service here. What we want to do is try to expand the continuum of care and be part of it and work together versus duplicating services that you can go find elsewhere. One of the biggest things that happens here that we hear all the time is that we reduce isolation and help people feel less alone by having a place to come, even if it is over Zoom. It has such an impact. We make treatment affordable. That's also one of the unique things about the organization. Scholarship funding. We don't turn people away based on their financial ability to be able to pay for service. So we do offer sliding scale free services, and our full fee is lower than the average. So we really work hard to make this affordable for everybody. And we collaborate with other professionals, other agencies, kind of like we're doing today. And we also support caregivers and survivors. One of the things that I think is also very striking, and looking at research about what helps people to heal and also not end up back in the hospital system, is having a place like Schurig Center and community engagement has been shown by research to decrease rehospitalization, reduce depression and anxiety, and also support the whole family, the survivor and the caregiver. So what we do in the way that we design our services is to help people with the array of challenges that are often experienced from acquired brain injury. Sometimes, particularly with traumatic brain injury, there are some behavioral challenges, language and communication deficits, particularly with stroke survivors, cognitive challenges, psychosocial challenges that people face with mood, anxiety, depression, really feeling isolated, their communities changed, potentially maybe having to not be able to work, relationships change, friendships change. So we really try to design services to help support that. And that feeling, I think you probably get this as caregivers too, that feeling that nobody gets you, that you're not understood, that nobody knows quite what it's like to have been through an injury, to almost died and be saved, or to be caregiving for somebody who's different, or your role with them has changed in your relationship. One of the big things that happens here at the center is people talk about how they're around people who get it, who understand what they've been through and how empowering that is for them. And there was a study that came out that basically showed that brain injury is a chronic condition, and rehabilitation requires a sustained and coordinated effort from a large team of professionals, so that it's not just the rehab in the hospital, it continues when you're home. And that's the model that ideally we would be creating. We have a whole array of services. You can visit our website and see the services that we offer and learn more, but they range from speech therapy with a speech therapist. We have a CogSmart program that's based out of UC San Diego to help people with managing daily life, support groups for survivors and caregivers. We help people access community resources, art therapy, concussion classes, a whole array of courses that we tailor to what individuals are looking for. I wanted to just quickly share that we also created a brain injury information handbook. The PDF is on our website. We created this about 6-7 years ago. We couldn't find anything like it, so we partnered with Sutter Health and created a handbook that walks caregivers and survivors through the process from when they're in the hospital to when they come home. And so I just wanted to let you know that you can check that out if you'd like. And who we serve: traumatic brain injury, stroke, other injuries, as Dr. Wilson talked about. The highest percentage of people we help have a traumatic brain injury, but we are serving 30%, close to 30% of people with stroke, and a decent number of people who have been affected by concussion. But we have, our reach is pretty broad. So direct service is over 500 people. And then we have several thousand people who we help through our online services. And about 34% of the people we help are seniors. So I wanted to share that. We also pay attention to how our services are helping, so we know that we're making a difference. We have outcome measures that are tailored to each service. We have objective measures that we use. We have treatment plans and surveys for survivors and caregivers, so we can find out if what we're offering is helping. And then we adjust if it's not. We have high satisfaction rates, which we're very proud of. And our outcome measures do show positive improvement rates and people accomplishing goals. And that speaks to neuroplasticity and the ability to continue to improve and develop coping strategies over the course of our lives. So let's see, with the continuum of care, this is just something to share to show that research has discovered and pointed out that many people after having a traumatic brain injury have had unmet needs when they're discharged and home from the hospital system. And there's an array of what those are that many can impact people's ability to work and kind of go back into the life that they had. And Dr. Manley's at UCSF, a neurosurgeon who was quoted in a newspaper by saying that we've gotten much better at getting people to survive, which is absolutely true from medical advances, but we have a lot of work to do to help them to recover and to continue to rehabilitate once they're home. So I think for time's sake, I wanted to share what survivors tell us that they need. They need a place to belong and be with people who get it. They need affordable treatment because outpatient therapy will end. So they want continued affordable treatment. They want resources in the community and help accessing them, but genuine caring and compassion to be with them where they are with what they need, whatever that looks like for each person. And continuing to connect with the community, feeling a sense of purpose, and having services that will support them to continue to be their best selves, and get education about injury and rehabilitation. And then also support for their family, because caregivers, we find, are often not given a lot of resources because the focus is on their loved one in the medical system. So we want to help there. There are a number of gaps in care and in the community for people with brain injury, as I'm sure you are aware as caregivers. Dr. Wilson, did you want to talk about psychotherapy? I think you were going to share a brief note about the importance of psychotherapy from your practice.
People with traumatic brain injury are often left out of the opportunities to receive psychotherapy because of outmoded ways of thinking about psychotherapy and its benefits, and that traumatic brain injury cannot make use of it. But my experience is just the opposite, that people with traumatic brain injury have a very high need to be able to meet and talk about in the context of psychotherapy, what the problems are they're facing and the opportunity to improve their lives. It's basically a myth that people with TBI cannot access and use psychotherapy. It's up to people that provide those services who have a background in TBI to step forward and provide those services, because I think it can make a huge difference. And I've worked with a number of TBI survivors over longer periods of time and seen amazing results. So psychotherapy is a service that we shouldn't keep from people who have traumatic brain injury. And also the inclusion of caregivers in that process is really important. I've had caregivers come into therapy sessions with their loved ones, and that ability to work on communication, to solve problems together is extremely important. So caregivers need to be included. I really feel that a more inclusive model, bringing the caregivers into that process, is really important. So
I think you're absolutely right. It's such a good point that you make, Dr. Wilson, and I really appreciate you adding that. Because also when you look at like the DSM or you look at some of our training, psychotherapy and even support groups are contraindicated for people with traumatic brain injury in particular. And we have found it to be very successful and very helpful. And I know other agencies and individuals have as well. But the work that you do by offering psychotherapy with such an understanding of brain injury and how the brain functions as well is such a gift. And we don't have enough practitioners that have that understanding and can offer.
Yeah, it's a resource that needs to be developed. Yeah.
We need more neuropsychologists. So just if anybody's on here and wants to go back to school. So I'll go into, let's see, click over here. And Woody Allen, well, you love him or you hate him or you don't really care, but he has a quote that I put in here because a caregiver said to me recently, I reached out to our caregivers to get some particular feedback for this particular webinar about their experience as peer groups facilitators, but also as caregivers. And one of them said to me this Yiddish quote, and it's similar to, if you want to make God laugh, tell him about your plans. Well, nobody plans to have an injury and nobody plans to be a caregiver of somebody with injury. And so some of the challenges that caregivers face is the Yiddish quote. She said, people plan, God laughs. So you're thrust into a new life without a roadmap, which I'm sure a lot of you feel that way. Lack of knowledge about what to do or what to try or how to plan. So people tell us that they often feel like they were dropped off at the edge of a cliff once they left the hospital system. And then it was like, okay, we're at the edge of the cliff. Now what do we do? Economic challenges, legal challenges, insurance complications are things that caregivers are often navigating. Limited resources and the 24/7 nature of caregiving. You don't get to stop being a caregiver. Feeling maybe lonely, overwhelmed, and as one of the caregivers said, undone. Others do not fully understand. So you can have support in your life, family, friends, people who genuinely care. But they may, unless they're caregiving as well, it's very hard to understand what that you're going through. And a big challenge is not losing yourself. And that's something that we heard from caregivers, is how do you maintain who you are separate from just being the caregiver of somebody that you love? So I wanted to share that. Caregivers also told us some of the things that they need to connect with others who get it, which we all need that. I think we all want to be around people who we can connect with and we kind of understand each other. So that's really beneficial and very needed. We were told by caregivers, affordable therapy so that their loved ones can continue to rehabilitate, being able to get respite and time away so you can balance, recuperate, and just kind of get a break from that role of caregiver for a brief period of time or however long you can get it. One of the things that caregivers get from some of our services is respite while their loved one gets to come here. Help finding resources, education about brain injury, what to expect, how do you support your loved one with challenges, coping strategies. We'll talk about a little bit of what to expect later on. Dr. Wilson will address that. Services that are designed for caregivers to honor what they need and to help them learn ways to cope and understand how to work with their loved one and support them. And case management and treatment planning help is very important, and there's not a lot of that out there. Usually you end up hiring a private case manager. So that is a gap in the field that we're hoping to try to help fill in the near future. And then financial assistance to support the need for hired help or continued therapies, housing, legal issues, things like that, and advocacy and help connecting with those important needed resources. So caregivers shared with us some of their insights and guidance that they thought would be helpful and would love to share with you today. Do whatever you can to sustain yourself and self-care, even though, when I was a caregiver, I found it incredibly difficult to know, how do I take care of myself while I'm working, while I'm coordinating another person's care and life. It's really a challenge, and but it is essential to be effective and to not lose yourself or burn out, which we'll talk about as well. Acknowledge your emotions. Have a place where you, like caregiver support group or your friends, where you can be honest and just say, I'm exhausted, I'm burning out, I'm tired, I need help, or I'm scared, or whatever it is, but to not keep emotions bottled up. Join a group. There's our support group. There's UCSF has a brain injury support group for caregivers and survivors to attend together. Ask for help, seek out professionals for guidance, even if it's just to consult and see what you might be able to do next or to get some information. Accept the limitations of the medical system. The medical system's great in a lot of ways. And then there's a gap, and to be able to accept that and then find ways to fill in where the gaps are as much as we can. Seek out education, allow yourself to be supported. That's a hard one too for caregivers, but to allow yourself to have support from others is critical. We can get in the habit of just doing for others and kind of forget to have support come back to us too. Some caregivers actually mentioned giving back in some ways. So we have peer-led support group for caregivers, and those peer-led facilitators are doing it in part because they want to give back to and help others. And then laugh a lot. So you can do laughter therapy, yoga. I think there's laughter yoga or something. But I would find that I like to watch movies that were light and kind of and then just doing things that make you laugh and have a good time. We got to keep honoring that side of ourselves that just enjoys life. Caregiver burnout, Dr. Wilson, I think this was something you want to talk about.
As you could see from the list of the needs that caregivers have, the extremely stressful lives that caregivers live, and oftentimes the result is burnout. Burnout can apply to any profession, any occupation, any activity that a person engages in over a longer period of time, where the stress and demands of the position really take a toll. And caregivers are unappreciated in terms of the activities that they engage in and the service they provide. And so we need to pay attention to the caregivers and their ability to work with and continue to provide the services that they do. And so I wanted to address a few things related to caregiver burnout. So first of all, we need to care for our caregivers, and we need caregivers for our caregivers. And we need to be able to listen, number one, to their concerns. Number two, don't offer unsolicited advice. They're pretty well trained by the time, they get into this line of work, and the services they provide show their dedication. Give them space. I think this is really important. Many times they're so stressed that they don't really have time to kind of focus on their own needs. Don't give them guilt trips. It's a demanding job. Nothing is perfect at times, but they need the support. Have empathy. Show your concern and your understanding. Don't judge. And as Patricia just said, do laugh. Give them the sense that they are needed and important. And in doing so, if we follow these kinds of things, we can care for our caregivers.
Absolutely. And Dr. Wilson, do you love how I have bullets and numbers for that slide? These are very important pieces of information to have both. I do notice somebody in the chat too had put that there is laughter yoga online at UCSF or something. So I just want to support people to look at the chat because there is some resources showing up. And so Amy, our resource specialist, if you're on, jot down some of those resources that you're seeing in the chat. Okay, so we'll do a little laughter there. Oh, so Dr. Wilson, so what we're going to do now is the last kind of portion of this before questions is to talk about some of the things that caregivers may be able to expect or just to be aware of as your loved one is aging and as time passes. And Dr. Wilson's going to kind of go into a little bit of that.
So one of the things to be aware of is concussion is, as I mentioned in the beginning, is an injury that can sometimes be unseen, the effects, but the effects accumulate or add up over time. And there is a study here, I included it, it's this one, which shows that the persistent effects of concussion can last for a long time. And this study focused only on people who had single concussions, not multiple concussions, but only one concussion. And they did what's called a scoping review, which means that they brought in a lot of research studies that have been done on this and used those to kind of get a window on what the effects were. And so they found through this scoping review of many studies that the traditional point of view that concussion represents a very small portion of the people who have chronic problems is incorrect. That even after many months, many years, people with post-concussion syndrome, much higher percentage than originally thought, have problems. So this is an important study. It tells us if we're caregivers and we're working with people with TBI, that the problems may persist in their later years, and we need to have a support system that addresses that. Not just the caregivers alone, but the community in terms of its understanding the services that are available that can help these people when they get older. And that raises the question of dementia from TBI. Is there any connection between traumatic brain injury and dementia? Yes, research has found that any medical history of head injury has doubles the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and the chances of developing non-Alzheimer's dementia, other forms of dementia, even after adjustment of the effects of age. And this was published in Neurology. So basically what this is indicating is that there is a much higher risk for people who have a history of traumatic brain injury of chronic problems, including dementia, when they get older. And so our whole system of care really needs to be modified to take that into account. And this has to do with a study that was done at the University of Virginia. And in this study, they took 538 patients who had a history of mild traumatic brain injury or concussion and a loss of consciousness of 20 minutes or less. They were seen in the emergency department and discharged. They didn't spend any more time, they were not in the hospital more than 24 hours. And they all had what were called sort of normal, higher end Glasgow Coma Scale scores of 13 to 15. They found on follow-up with 424 of these patients 3 months later that 79%, almost 80%, complained of persistent headaches. 59% had memory problems, and of those who were employed before, only 34% were employed now, 3 months after their injury. That's of those who were employed. So what that tells you is that chronic problems arise with traumatic brain injury and affect all spheres of life, including physical health, cognitive functioning, and employment. And we need to have a system that can adjust and understand that reality.
There you go.
And so I'm putting this in here just as a little guide to an area of research that people are delving into now, which is what can you do to improve your brain health? And what can you do to avoid those kinds of problems if you can do something that will make a difference? And it may not change everything, but there are ways that paying attention to your brain health can make a difference.
Dr. Wilson, is this for survivors and caregivers? I mean, for general?
For
public?
everyone, including survivors and caregivers. So there are this particular Alzheimer's research organization in England, this was done in the UK, developed an application, or I should say a website, Brain Checker, it's called Brain Health Checker, that you can go to and take a survey. It doesn't take very long, it's only 12 questions. And these questions lead to steps that you can engage in to reduce your risk of dementia. So this applies to caregivers, it applies to the people they serve, survivors, and also to professionals and everyone else. The vast majority of people are not doing enough to ward off dementia in later life, according to this research. The charity also investigated ways to empower people to make more positive choices and reduce the odds of developing dementia. I didn't know this, but at the time when I did this review, 40% of dementias are thought to be linked to lifestyle factors, which can be modified to reduce a person's risk. So if you can pay attention to a few lifestyle factors, this can possibly make a difference.
And we have about 2 minutes, Dr. Wilson.
Okay, so here's a sample. This is not everything from that brain checker, but here's a couple of questions. How often do you do activities that challenge your brain? This could include challenging work, reading, playing games, doing puzzles, learning a language, playing an instrument, etc. And so you respond to that. On average, how many hours of quality sleep do you think you get each night? So again, responding to that can give you some clues as to how well sleep is providing a respite for your brain, you might say. Do you regularly take steps to look after your mental well-being? This could include the other things that I had mentioned previously, including spending time with your friends and family. So here are the 12 things that this brain health checker provides in terms of giving you some clues as to what you're doing that may benefit your brain or not doing. So I encourage you to go to their website, check it out, and see, do a quick brain health check for yourself.
I think I'm going to avoid that.
And then there's one other study that was also done in the UK. They seem to be doing a lot of very interesting work with this issue. And I've entitled this slide, Count Your Daily Steps. Well, they studied a lot of people, 78,430 subjects. And they followed these people for 6.9 years, almost 7 years. And a higher number of steps, this is associated with walking, was associated with a lower risk of all-cause dementia. The findings suggest that a dose of just under 10,000 steps per day may be optimally associated with a lower risk of dementia. Steps performed at a higher intensity, more purposeful or brisk walking resulted in stronger associations. So here's something that many people can do, not everybody, but there are ways to modify this, to engage in activity and exercise that may still benefit the brain if you're unable to walk.
Oh, so this kind of summarizes some of what you've just shared. Yeah.
Yes. So here's some ways that you can boost your cognitive fitness and longevity. Exercise, reading, hobbies, puzzles, join a community organization, for example, BORP, and take a class, play board games, visit museums, reduce stress, and address depression. Join in an activity, a class at the Schurig Center.
Did Dennis Kravitz put that in his Huffington Post? Did he mention Shurig Center?
I did a little editorial there, sorry.
I know, we're a little biased, of course. So we're coming to the end of our time, so we want to make sure we have time for your questions. And one of the biggest messages that Dr. Wilson and I wanted to share is that there is hope, there is services, there is genuine caring for your situation and people that you love. There are organizations like ours, and there are others that are trying to help fill gaps in care. We just want you to know that you're not as alone as you might feel at times. And I know what that feeling is. So this is just a sample of some of the people that are involved in our organization. And the way that we support people is to start off with a call or an email to our organization, and we'll gather more information and we'll find out if you want help finding resources, or if you're interested in our services. We'll do an intake and see which of our services might be most appropriate for you or your loved one. And if we don't offer what you're looking for, we try to help you find it in the community. And the quote here is actually a quote from Dr. Wilson that I've had in other presentations, that accidents are a part of life, and though we cannot undo those events, we can provide a recovery that is based on a renewed sense of hope, purpose, and support. And so here's just our website, a little bit of information. And okay, cute puppies to lead us into questions. Did that pretty much cover it, Dr. Wilson?
I think that was a great, thank you.
Okay, great. So Calvin, we are ready for questions.
Perfect. Thank you both. Yeah, I guess we'd like to get right into it. We have a questioner who wants to know actually what do you do without community support? And maybe I might tack on to that is, if they are looking for community support, are there some maybe out of the box ways to go about finding that?
So looking for community support and thinking outside of the box on how to access community support as a caregiver, or for your loved one. So I guess I would answer it in both ways. So one of the things that caregivers have told us that they find helpful is they start Googling. That's how most people find us, actually, is either through their medical professional tells them about us, or they Google and they find us. And then we have a whole database of resources to help link people. Community colleges often have classes through their disability program for survivors to access. We've heard about that. There's each county has a Center for Independent Living that often knows about resources. And then thinking about what you might be interested in, that is as a caregiver, that a class you can take or some way that you can engage with the community to get certain activities. Dr. Wilson, did you have anything to add to that?
No, but I think the Family Caregiver Alliance is one of the resources that we often bring up with our clients, and because it's such a great link to other resources. And in that sense, I think it's important that we continue that relationship. It's a very positive one for both organizations.
I've also found as a caregiver and also in my roles here, that I tend to ask questions. So I'll reach out to, like on my Facebook page, I will say, looking for this type of resource, or on Nextdoor, does anybody know a good osteopath or a good neuropsychologist? Or I'll put out to other people. I've even with friends, I've gotten referrals to other professionals that they know, and I've consulted with them, and then they lead me to another person to talk to. So I, for myself, have found it very successful to reach out and get links from other people. And it takes some legwork because you end up following links, but it's one of the things that's worked for me.
We have a great resource specialist at the Schurig Center.
Yeah, I think she's on here, Amy. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question from a listener who wanted to know, Patricia, actually you mentioned this in passing, but do you encourage osteopathic treatment as part of recovery?
Well, that's probably going to be a question more for Dr. Wilson than for me. One of the things at our organization, we don't make recommendations for treatment because that's not the type of facility we are. We can make recommendations for ways to support yourself or classes that might be a benefit, things like that, but I'm not trained to make that kind of a recommendation. I know some of our clients have found it to be very helpful for them, particularly with certain types of injury. But Dr. Wilson, maybe you're better to answer this one.
Well, I do know that sometimes in our support and education groups, other survivors bring up and mention providers that they've benefited from. And that tends to be one way that people can connect. I think we're in a position where we can't endorse one particular person over another, but we often will find ways that they can get information through other clients that have utilized those kinds of services.
That's actually one of the benefits of support groups, is the sharing of resources and what's worked and things that they've tried. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question. A listener who wanted to know if you knew of any analogous organization specifically in Arizona, or if not, the other thing I want to tack onto that is in terms of the online or remote offerings, are those available to anyone across the country?
Good questions. Yes. So our remote classes and groups, which we offer many, are for anybody, regardless of location. And Amy's actually a really good person to answer this question as a resource specialist, but we're located in Larkspur in the Bay Area. We're the only place that offers the array of services that we do. There is an aphasia center specific to aphasia classes and groups. I know that there is a class at San Francisco City College that focuses on using neuropsych online, a cognitive computerized program. There's also Janet Pomeroy Center in San Francisco. You have to be a San Francisco resident, but they have a program. I know Alameda City College, I think it's Alameda. No, maybe I think it's Alameda. There's some classes there as well for brain injury. And then there's the On Track program in Concord out in the East Bay. Those are the Bay Area programs that I know of off the top of my head that do offer some services. They don't have the same array that we do, but they do offer specific services, and they're all wonderful as well. And then I think looking at the California Brain Injury Association website, they have a list of resources and other organizations. And in Arizona, I don't know of any off the top of my head, but Amy can do a little bit of researching if you want to reach out to her. And you also look at the Brain Injury Association of Arizona, and I would start there if that's how I would probably try to figure that out.
Thank you. We had another viewer who wanted to know if it's advisable or helpful for a stroke or TBI, someone living with that condition, to hear or learn from the person who's caregiving for them, providing care, about caregiver burnout and the caregiver strategies to deal with it. So would it be helpful for the person who is living with some form of brain injury to learn from the caregiver about caregiver burnout and kind of their strategies on managing caregiver burnout, sharing kind of that, behind the scenes information, so to speak?
I think that would be extremely helpful. And I mentioned in supporting survivors and caregivers, we need to be more inclusive and bring them into situations where information can be shared and they can work constructively on problems. And I do that in the form of psychotherapy services that I provide as a licensed neuropsychologist. So there are ways that I think that can be addressed and would be extremely beneficial to survivors.
I think that's an excellent question. And it's one that I think, case by case dependent as well. It can probably always be helpful, like Dr. Wilson is saying, to work together and bring the family unit together, and then also have separate places to talk about your experience and your feelings. And but we here at the center, we find that it sometimes will depend on the functional level of the survivor and their awareness. I think, what is that? That's called anosognosia. Dr. Wilson, the ability to have awareness of the impact that you may have.
Your own condition.
Your own condition. And so we do have some survivors whose injury is severe enough where they won't really be able to process what their caregiver needs at that level. But most people, I think I agree with Dr. Wilson that it's really beneficial to have that conversation, but in a way that's supportive and brings people together, and doesn't make a survivor feel bad for the needs that they have, and also doesn't make a caregiver feel bad because of all their range of emotions that you have. So yeah, it's a good question. I think done skillfully, it can be very beneficial.
Thank you. And I think we have time for, it looks like, perhaps one more question. And this person wants to know, I think Dr. Wilson mentioned about how some of these concussions can lead to kind of more troubling outcomes later on. But say a caregiver or someone listening, they take a fall. It seems okay, but maybe they get a little dazed, or maybe they see stars. Are there certain signs where you might think, well, maybe this thing that maybe this is a more serious injury that I should they need to follow up with a medical provider? And are there certain maybe red flags that you can keep an eye out that you might have more of a serious something that you need to see a medical provider about?
Well, it probably should be immediate if there's any indication of any medical problems. For example, the three most common symptoms after concussion are headache is number one, dizziness number two, and that can also involve balance issues. And number three is memory problems. And memory problems tend not to surface until a little bit later in recovery, after the person re-engages in some of their regular activities or their work. But if those symptoms are there or persisting, really should see a medical provider as soon as possible to check that out. Sometimes things can progress in a matter of days or weeks into something more serious. So that type of prevention is very important.
And symptoms don't always show up within the first 24 hours. So somebody may have a minor blow to the head or whiplash, which also can result in concussion. So you don't have to hit your head to have a concussion or traumatic brain injury. And the symptoms, often people will go to the emergency room, they'll be told they're fine, they're sent home, and we'll get calls when they realize that they weren't fine and the symptoms showed up a little bit later. So that's something, it's just something to know, because I went through this with my grandmother where she had falls, she would hit her head, and we'd go to the physician and or the emergency room, and I'd have to ask for scans sometimes to make sure that she did not have a bleed or something else going on. And they rarely talked about concussion. So I knew enough to pay attention to symptoms, and they can last for several weeks. And most concussions will heal within a few weeks. But as Dr. Wilson pointed out in his research, what he was sharing in the research, that there are longer term effects that can happen. And so the more you know about the symptoms, and we have some information on our website if you wanted to learn a little bit more about concussion.
Okay, thanks everyone. It looks like that's all the time we have for today. These oh, sorry, I did have one final question that I was going to ask. This is, I guess, a question for you, Patricia. Would we are we able to share the slides that you presented today with the viewers?
Oh yeah, I don't see any reason why not.
Okay, fantastic. And the other thing I forgot to mention right at the start of the webinar is that we are recording this, so we'll be able to get a recording to you all so you can view it later, and then also we'll be able to include the slides, so you'll all have those for your reference. So yeah, so again, thank you all for joining us today. I know everyone's time is very precious, so we really appreciate that. The Family Caregiver Alliance webinars, they're free. We do them every month, and you can find out more about them on our website, caregiver.org. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you very much for our two presenters today, Patricia Gill and Dr. Wilson.